The good news is that we're told the fire has been contained. It's now just a natural burn-off. That's the stage they're in right now. The bad news, however, the damage that's already been done and the potential for some environmental impact. The fire erupted around 11:30 last night, likely due to a lightning strike. No one was injured then or during the process of fighting the fire, which took nearly 12 hours before containment. Glynns Creek is nearby, which spills into the Kentucky River. And while 45,000 barrels of bourbon were lost, along with potentially many jobs associated with this warehouse, the concern now is for hotspots reigniting and the prevention of contamination into the river.
The decision was made by the command staff in consultation with the Energy and Environment Cabinet from the Commonwealth of Kentucky to allow the fire to continue to burn. And that's being done because as the fire burns, the distilled spirits that are in the rubble and the debris pile, the distilled spirits are burning off with that.
That basically means once water is doused on it later, it'll reduce the amount of contamination that would spill into Glynns Creek. Coming up on LEX 18 News at 6, a nearby resident tells us what he saw when this fire erupted late last night. In Woodford County, Michael Burke, LEX 18 News.
It looked like the sun was coming up at 11 o'clock last night.
You can't describe it any better than Joe Carter just did. A lightning strike was the likely cause of fire at this Jim Beam barrel house, wiping out 45,000 barrels of bourbon. But with the fire now contained, there are much greater concerns than just destroyed alcohol.
At this point, the environmental impact is the bigger emergency, and we're trying to avoid making the mess bigger.
What they're trying to avoid is contamination runoff into Glynns Creek and then the Kentucky River. So for now, they'll let it burn off naturally, and that could last well into the night.
The distilled spirits are burning off with that. What that means is when they put water on it later to extinguish the fire, there'll be less contamination into Glynns Creek.
Phil Long is a former firefighter enjoying some shade on his nearby front porch.
It's almost impossible to put out.
He knows exactly what his fellow firefighters have been dealing with since last evening.
It'll burn in the ground for a long time after you get the flames out, till it burns the flames out of all the alcohol out of the ground.
45,000 barrels worth of Kentucky's famous alcohol. Now the fight to keep it out of the river begins. In Woodford County, Michael Burke, LEX 18 News.
A quiet and calm Kentucky River today, but while you can't see anything out of the ordinary here, Deborah and John Graneri say you can smell it.
There was a strange smell, it smelled funny out here.
It was the first thing the couple noticed this morning before they heard about the fire at this Jim Beam aging facility, raging just a mile from their home.
Right now we're hoping that we can still enjoy the river and do what we were planning on doing for the holiday.
The owners of the Beam aging facility say 45,000 barrels of whiskey have been lost, and they say the fire was likely caused by a lightning strike. State environment workers say some of the whiskey has run off into the Kentucky River, which explains the smell, and that's a concern here at the water treatment plant in Frankfort.
They have been here almost 24 hours since the fire broke out to monitor and make sure that our water source is protected.
Spokesperson Kathy Lindsay says workers are testing the water every 30 minutes, and while there might be a slight whiskey smell, she says the drinking water is safe. As for people like the Garneris who want to go boating on the river this holiday weekend,
We'll just have to wait and see what happens.
according to state officials, people should be on the lookout for an unpleasant odor and color, maybe some dead fish on the river. In Franklin County, Catherine Collins, LEX 18 News.
It's a sight straight out of a bourbon lover's nightmare. 45,000 barrels destroyed.
It is sad. It's sad that the whiskey won't go on the market, but it's sad for the people that made it and really a sad sight to see happening in Kentucky.
But it's not just whiskey that was lost in the fire on Jim Beam's property, but also money. Tom Fisher, a top bourbon journalist, educator, and founder of bourbonblog.com, estimates the losses could be upwards of $45 million, and he says that is at a minimum.
So there's no way that any of those barrels were worth any less than $1,000. In fact, I believe most are worth more than that.
Fisher says the loss translates to around 13.5 million bottles of bourbon. Beam's parent company says this will not affect the spirit's availability to customers. Fisher says they have their size to thank.
But because we're talking about Jim Beam, it's still a big hit, but they have 3 million from what I understand, barrels, over 3 million barrels aging at one time.
And as far as a price increase on store shelves, Fisher is hopeful that won't be an issue.
I do hope that prices will stay affordable for all Americans, all those that want to, especially on 4th of July, raise a toast with a good glass of bourbon. We want to make sure it stays affordable.
In Woodford County, Claire Crouch, LEX 18 News.
It warped the frame of the windows where it just got so hot.
45,000 barrels of bourbon wasn't the only loss from Tuesday night's fire at the Jim Beam Barrel Warehouse.
The whole top part crinkled.
Parts of Gary Tate's 3 homes across the street sustained damage. He was woken up by Tuesday's fire.
I thought our propane tank out back blew up. That's what I thought it was because it shook the whole house.
The animals on his property then became his top priority.
I got everything out because it was so hot. I was afraid I'd lose them all.
Now they're back in the place Gary has called home for 20 years. And during that time, he says Jim Beam has been a good neighbor, something that hasn't changed since Tuesday.
They're going to have a restoration crew here next week to start fixing our houses, putting new windows in them.
And despite the estimated $45 million in losses, guess who's picking up the bill for Mr. Tate?
Jim Beam's taking care of every bit of it.
Work also continues on nearby Glynns Creek and the Kentucky River, which has already seen contamination. Fish and some other aquatic life have died given the runoff. Officials want river users to be aware of discoloration, foaming, and odor resulting from this once-in-a-lifetime natural disaster. At least Gary's hoping lightning only strikes once here.
I've been here, like say, 20 years. I've never seen nothing like that, and I sure pray I never have to see it again.
In Woodford County, Michael Burke, LEX 18 News.